There's nothing more stressful in a developer's life than a technical interview. In this video, we're going to talk about 7 essential JavaScript functions you should master for your technical interviews. JavaScript function number 1, slice. Slice is a function that allows you to create a shallow copy of another array. Take this animals array, for example. Say I only wanted to keep ant through camel and I wanted to delete duck and elephant. The way you can do that is using slice. So if I say animals.slice, the first option here is the start index. It starts with index 0. This second number, the second option is the end index. Now, whatever the end index is, it will not include that. So say I said 0, 1, 2. Let's click run to see what happens. So as you can see, it just returned ant and bison. It did not return the end index. To do that, you need to go one more index up, say 3, and then it'll just return the first 3 of the array. Now, say you wanted to return maybe the last 2 animals in this array. So this would be one way you could do it. All right, so that returned duck, elephant. Another option is if, say it's a really long array with maybe 100 different items and you just want the last 2 items, you can use a negative number. So you can say -2, and this will do the same thing. So as you can see, if you put a negative number, it basically, instead of starting at the 0 index, it'll jump to the very last item in the index for -1, and then -2 goes back one more, and so forth. And just to show you another way you can use negative indexing in the slice function, say I want camel and duck. Well, I could say 0, 1, 2. So I could say 2 is my starting index. I want to keep that. And instead of saying 3, 4, instead of making this be 4, another option would be to say -1. The reason is by saying -1 for the second option, what we're saying is the -1 index, the last element in the array, that is going to be the ending index. And remember, whatever we put for the end index is not included in the array. So let's try to run this, and it should just return camel and duck, and it did. The last thing I wanted to show you with the slice method is that it will work on strings too. So say I come down here, I'll say const str for string 1 equals this is my string. Just like you could use slice to create a shallow copy of an array, with the first option being the starting index, the second option being the ending index, you can do that same exact thing with strings. So for example, say I just want the word this in this string. I could say str1.slice. I could say 0 to start at the 0 index and then count up from there. 0, 1, 2, 3, 4. I'll say 4 is the ending index. Let's run that to see what happens. And as you can see, it returned a shallow copy of this string, and it just returned the word this. Splice is a function that will change the content of an array. So whereas slice does not change the content of the actual array, slice just creates a shallow copy of an array. Splice will actually change the value of the array. Let me show you what I mean. So currently the value of months is January, February, March, April, June. And so when I click start, it shows that array. Say I wanted to remove January from the list. I could say months.splice. Splice again is 0-based indexed. So your first option is the starting point. So I'm going to say 0 since Jan is at the 0 index. Option 2 is the number of elements you want to remove. So I just want to remove 1 element. And the third option, which we'll use in a bit, allows you to replace whatever you remove with something new. And so I'll just say Feb. So now let's console log the same months array and see what happens. So as you can see, it actually changed the contents of this array. It removed January because we said at index 0, we want to remove 1 item and we want to replace it with this string Feb. And that's what happened up here. It got replaced with Feb March, April, June. Now, say we want to add an item to an array. We don't want to take something away. We just want to add to it. Say maybe we want to add the string May between April and June, but we don't want to remove June or April. You can do that with the splice method too. So I'm going to say months.splice. This starting point will need, for this example, to be after the April index. So for example, February is 0, March is 1, April is 2. So we would be starting at the 3 index right here. So we would say 3 is the starting point. For the second option, which is to say how many elements you want to remove, you would just say 0 because we don't want to remove anything. We just want to add something at this point in the array. And then we would put a comma and put the string May. And this should add the element May to this array. So let's go ahead and run that and see what happens. All right, and as you can see, it now has February, March, April, May, June, and this is the original array. So we did not create a copy of the array, we updated the original array. The indexOf function returns the first index at which a given element can be found in an array. And if the element cannot be found in the array, it will return the number -1. So take this array for example. Say I wanted to find the index of bison. Well, then I could type bison in this indexOf function, and let's see what happens. So as you can see, it returned the index number 1 because bison, even though it's at index number 1 and at the end of the array, it just returned the very first time it shows up in the array. One of the most useful parts of the index function is it'll let you know if something even exists in the array. So say I say index of spider. Let's see what happens. It returns -1, which is there to let you know spider is not in this array of beasts. Now, say I wanted to get this second bison. Say I didn't want it to be the first one. Say I wanted it to be the second one. Well, one of the ways you can do that is I can type bison in here again. And what I can say is maybe I just want to search the second half of beasts. Instead of searching the whole thing, maybe I just want to search the second half. Well, this second option is zero-based indexing. You can create a starting point. So since I know there's 5 items in this array, I could say index 2, then it will start from here, the 2 index, and search onward. So let's see what happens. And as you can see, it returned the 4 index because the second time bison shows up is at the 4 index. So this can come in handy for some tricky questions, and it can potentially speed up your code because you can just search part of the array instead of the whole array. Now, say you had an interview question where they wanted you to find all the indexes of a particular string or element. So for example, say they wanted a list of all the indexes of the element string bison. Using the indexOf function with the element you want to find and the start index function, you could create a function like this down here that allows me to find the index of the word bison, all the indexes, an array full of indexes of all the bison within the beasts array. You can find this code in the description below. I created a function called findIndexes that takes in the animals array and has a start index as its 2 parameters. Above that, I created a starting index number and a const indexes array. If you look at how it's working, it first finds the index of bison in this beasts array. The starting index starts at 0. Once it finds the index of bison, the very first time it shows up, if you come down here, you'll see indexes.push. It pushes that index into this indexes array. Then it updates the value of this starting index. It'll say starting index, make it the value of this index that we just found +1, and then run this function over again with the same array beasts, but this time have the starting index be this new starting index that we just updated. And then it loops through that again. It'll continue to do that over and over again until either the start index value is greater than the length of beast, which that would happen if say the last item in the array were bison, eventually the index would be greater than the length of beasts. If you didn't have a return value at that point, this would loop infinitely. The second thing it looks for is if index becomes -1, you know that we officially have reached the point to where the word bison no longer appears in the array. And then at that point, it will console log the indexes and stop the function, return the function. And then down here, I go ahead and trigger the function. So let's go ahead and run this and see if it works. And there, as you can see, by using this indexOf function and the start index functionality within that, I was able to create a function that found all the indexes of bison inside of this beasts array. So if you have a tricky technical question like that, this is a way you can use the indexOf function to find the index of all the items within an array. And if that was a little bit confusing, you can rewind the video, watch this over again. And like I said, I have the code to this in the description below that you can check out as well. The remainder operator, or the percentage sign, returns the remainder left over when one number is divided by another. So for example, say we console log 13 percentage sign 5. Just imagine the percentage sign is the dividing sign, but instead of returning, like normally, let's go ahead and return this. Normally this would return 2.6. In basic math, this would be 2 with 3 left over. Well, what the percentage sign does is it cuts out that 2 and just gives whatever is left over. So 13 percentage sign 5 will return the number 3. So this is very useful for tricky questions, asking you to find out if something is divisible by 3 or 5 or 7 or whatever. The way you know something is divisible is this would return 0. So for example, if I say 10 percentage sign 5, this should return 0 because there should be no remainders. And it did. So if we had a function with this percentage sign, we would know that this is divisible by 5 because it returns 0. But if it returns anything other than 0, we know it is not divisible by 5. And if you put a minus sign before the number, it will return the remainder as a negative number. So this is one of those situations where technical interviews, they love to ask questions like that. Say you have an array full of numbers, create a function that returns only the numbers that are divisible by 3 or 5 or 7. The way you can know that is you should use this percentage sign, and whatever numbers have a remainder of 0, then you know it's divisible by that number. Push and unshift. I know these are two separate functions, but they're so similar that I just went ahead and combined them into this one section. The push function will add elements to the end of an array. The unshift function will add elements to the beginning of an array. These functions do update the original array, so they don't create a shallow copy. So for example, say I wanted the number 7 at the end of this array. I could say nums.push 7, and this will push the number 7 at the end of the array. Then say I want the numbers 1 and 2 at the beginning of the array. I could say nums.unshift, and I could put 1, 2 at the beginning of the array. And that's another thing. If you want to add more than one thing, you can put a comma and add more. So say I say nums push 7, 8, nums unshift 1, 2. This should add both to the end of the array. Let's see what happens. And there you go. It added 1 and 2 with the unshift function. It added 7 and 8 with the push function. Pop and shift. Again, I know these are two different functions, but they're so similar that I added them into the same section. Pop will remove an element from the end of an array. Shift will remove an element from the beginning of an array. So take this array of numbers, for example. Say I want to remove the 1 at the beginning and the 4 at the end. I could use pop and shift to do that. So I'll say nums.pop. This will just automatically remove the last number from the array. And let's say nums.shift. This will automatically remove the first element from the array. So it should just leave 1, 2, 3, 4 in the original array. So let's console log this to see what happens. And there you go. It removed the first item and the last item. Another thing about this is you can create a new number with the value of what you pop or shift off. So for example, for this variable num1, if I say equals nums.pop, it will take the last value of an array and assign it to that variable. If I say let num2 equals nums.shift, it will take the first element from within the nums array and assign that value to num2. And so let's console log that and see what happens. And as you can see, it popped off the number 4 for num1, and it took the number 1 from the beginning of the array for number 2. Join. Join is a function that creates a string using the elements within an array. So it'll transform an array into a string. So for example, say we have these elements here, fire, air, water. Let's console log what happens when we join them. As you can see, it just returns fire, air, water separated by commas. Now, if you put a value within the join function, say an empty string, it will replace these commas that you see here with just an empty string. So let's see what happens. As you can see, it returned fire, air, water without commas separating them. If you leave the join statement empty, it will automatically just add a comma. But if you put something in the join statement, that's what will be used to join the elements together. So say I wanted to say comma with a space so that it's easier to read. There you can see it combined these elements together with a comma and a space between them. Or if you wanted to do a dash, it'll return these with a dash between them. And really this can be whatever you want. Maybe you want a space, a plus sign, another space, then it'll return this. And one more bonus JavaScript function that's good to check for edge cases is the type of function. The type of function will check what kind of variable you're working with, whether that's a number, a string, a Boolean, or null, or undefined. So for example, for console log type of 42, this should return number, this should return string, this should return Boolean, and this should return undefined since undeclared variable is not a defined variable. Let's see what happens. And it did. It returned number, string, Boolean, undefined. So that's an edge case that a lot of technical interviews will throw on you. Maybe your function will work at first. It'll pass all the tests. But then when you submit it, it doesn't pass 100% of the test. Well, it might be because you didn't check for edge cases, such as maybe they had a function that they told you was going to take in a string, but maybe what really happened during the real test is it sent you a number instead of a string, and it broke your function because you were expecting a string. So it's best to check the type of data that's being passed into a function before you do something. Make sure it's the type of data you're expecting. Check that to make sure you pass those edge case tests. Those are the JavaScript functions to master for your technical interviews. These are the essential functions that I find myself using over and over and over again in technical interviews. If there are any functions that I missed that you find yourself using all the time, please let us know in the comments below. It'll help out everyone who's about to take a technical interview. Like this video if you'd like to see more content like this. Don't forget to subscribe and hit the bell icon. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.